Welcome back. We're finishing the comfort crisis and the weird power of discomfort. This one gets into exercise, back pain, creativity, and why easy can quietly wreck you. Also, the airplane pretzels somehow become a philosophical event. That is honestly the most modern sentence ever. The Arctic example is so good because context just rewires everything. Bro, that's the whole thing. The plane becomes luxury after a month of suffering. Hot water on a plane starts feeling like divine intervention. And that's why comfort isn't bad, we just stop noticing it. But isn't there a danger in making people romanticize hardship too much? I think the argument is smaller and smarter than that. It's not suffer more, it's experience enough discomfort to remember what's normal. That makes sense, but I still feel attacked by my chair. Your chair has been complicit for years. The brain loves to search for new problems even when life gets better. That prevalence thing is wild because we don't just notice problems, we invent them. Humans got rich and immediately started grading the wallpaper. Exactly, problem creep is basically a personality trait now. And that connects to happiness, because more income didn't automatically mean more joy. Which is insane, because everybody still behaves like the next purchase fixes the mood. The book's brutal there, because it keeps saying enough doesn't feel like enough. So what actually helps? The answer keeps coming back to action, not consumption. Yeah, movement, hard conversations, doing the thing you avoided. The exercise section is where I got fully converted, honestly. Exercise is medicine is too polite. Inactivity is poison is the sharper line. That sounds like something you'd print on a gym wall and scare people with. But it's true because humans evolved to move all day, not once for 30 minutes. The carrying thing is fascinating because we forget we were built for load. Rucking feels like the cheat code no one taught us. Less injury, more muscle retention, and you get cardio at the same time. It sounds almost too practical, which is why people ignore it. If it doesn't require a neon sign and a membership fee, we distrust it. That's painfully accurate. And the body piece gets even more obvious with feet, backs, and shoes. The barefoot shoe argument is one I keep coming back to. If you cushion everything forever, eventually the system gets weak. My feet hearing this are not happy, by the way. Your feet are unionizing as we speak. The back pain stuff hit hard too, because sitting is basically trained helplessness. 80% of people getting back pain is a wild number. It makes sense when you realize chairs do the job your back used to do. Sitting on the floor is such a small intervention, but it matters. That's the whole 2% idea, right? Take the stairs, park farther away, walk the call, carry the groceries. It sounds tiny until you multiply it across years. Exactly, and the compounding is the secret. That applies mentally, too, not just physically. Definitely, because hard conversations and hard tasks build identity. I love the bit about beliefs being stacks of evidence. That feels much more real than pretending you can just decide to believe something new. Because you cannot mind control yourself into becoming disciplined overnight. If only we'd all be enlightened by Tuesday. But you can create experiences that generate new evidence. Like the Arctic, like boxing, like doing the hard thing and surviving it. And then the story changes from I can't to I have done hard things before. That's such a stronger identity than motivation ever is. Motivation is flimsy, identity is what carries you through round 12. The uncertainty piece is what makes people freeze, though. Right, we would rather stay in certain misery than risk uncertain possibility. And platforms know this, apps know this, businesses know this. Your phone has studied your weakness like a graduate student. Brutal but fair. The scary part is that the fun stuff is genuinely fun. So the answer isn't banning everything. No, it's conscious choice and awareness. That feels almost too simple, which is probably why it works. Do you think abundance makes us lazy or just passive? I think it makes us default to easy unless something forces creativity. Which is why scarcity can make people unbelievably inventive. That company story is perfect. Running out of money sharpened everything. Less resource, less waste, more first principles. Also less room for nonsense meetings about nonsense. The most valuable kind of budget cut. But the bigger warning is success itself can make you complacent. Right, because once things work, nobody wants to disturb the machine. And then suddenly the world moves on while you're protecting comfort. The sadness data really lands because it feels culturally true. More wealth, more tech, more convenience, and still more unhappiness. That should have been impossible, but here we are. So what's the antidote in one sentence? Do hard things on purpose before life forces them on you. That's such a good line because it's not macho, it's practical. And it can be tiny or huge, but it has to be real. Like joining the team, taking the walk, having the conversation. Exactly, because life gets better when your tolerance for discomfort grows. Which is a terrible slogan and a great philosophy. Put that on a mug and nobody buys it. No chance. But I think that's the lasting point of both books. Awareness first, then small changes, then a different life. Yeah, and maybe a little more gratitude along the way. That's a wrap on this two-part run, and honestly, it was a great one. We got into the comfort crisis, the scarcity brain, and why discomfort still matters. Also confirmed that chairs are low-key suspicious. And pretzels remain undefeated in the deep philosophical arena. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode. Welcome back. This episode is all about comfort, discomfort, and the stories we tell ourselves. And honestly, this one gets weirdly personal once you realize the story is doing half the damage. That Arctic example was wild because hot water on a plane became a spiritual event. Imagine crying over airplane sink water because your life got too hard elsewhere. But that is the whole point, right? Context rewires what feels normal. And most of us never get that reset, so our baseline keeps shrinking. That prevalence idea was fascinating, because when problems disappear, we just invent new ones. Humans are basically premium quality complaint machines with legs. That is harsh but annoyingly accurate. And it explains why better living does not automatically mean better feeling. That stat about income rising 50% while happiness barely moved was brutal. We keep assuming the next purchase will solve the internal weather. It never does, it just buys a cleaner distraction. What I liked is that he did not romanticize suffering. He just argued for useful discomfort. Like walking more, carrying things, taking stairs, sitting on the floor. Which sounds small until you realize most people are aggressively avoiding even tiny effort. That 2% stare study was such a perfect metaphor for human behavior. Everybody knows the better option, almost nobody takes it. The escalator is winning the war against civilization, one lazy ankle at a time. That sounds ridiculous, but that's basically the book. And then it compounds, because each easy choice trains the next easy choice. That downward spiral with muscle loss was scary because it is so believable. Less movement, less strength, less confidence, less movement again. It becomes a self-fulfilling identity, not just a body problem. And the same thing happens psychologically with hard conversations and hard projects. You dodge one uncomfortable thing, then you become the person who dodges. Which is why beliefs are not these magical private truths, they are evidence stacks. I loved that framing, because it makes change feel less mystical and more earned. You do a thing, your brain records it, and then the story updates. Which means the route to becoming braver is not a pep talk, it is a receipt. A receipt of surviving the hard thing. Exactly. And then the next hard thing looks a little less fake and a little more doable. That is why the hero's journey keeps coming up everywhere, because humans need the trial. Not because suffering is good, but because capability is only revealed under pressure. We used to get forced into that pressure by life itself. Now we can avoid it for years and still wonder why we feel flat. That line about maybe taking 2 weeks off and doing something kick-ass is actually radical. Radical because it sounds irresponsible to the comfort industrial complex. But I get the point. Even a short adventure can update your operating system. And uncertainty is the gatekeeper there because certainty feels safer than possibility. The app example was brilliant because people hate not knowing more than bad news itself. A delayed plane with no timeline is somehow worse than a delayed plane with a number. Humans love suffering as long as it comes with a schedule. That is so true, absurdly true. And yet the scary part is that uncertainty can be the best thing that ever happens to you. That scarcity research about fewer resources producing better ideas was a huge one for me. Because it explains why the scrappy phase of a business is often the most inventive. When you run out of money, suddenly everyone discovers genius. Budget cuts, nature's accelerator pedal. But there is a real lesson there for big teams and big lives, too. Too much resource can make you default to obviousness. You stop asking what is true and start asking what is already approved. That is where underdog energy matters, because hunger keeps you honest. What I liked most is that he did not treat corporations like villains in a cartoon. He was basically saying the system rewards whatever feels good right now. Of course it does, because boring ethical products usually die first. That is the depressing truth nobody wants to say out loud. So the burden lands on awareness, not fantasies about perfect regulation, which is actually empowering if you think about it. Not because the world is innocent, but because your attention is still yours. And that loops back to the most practical part of all this: tiny daily choices. Park farther away, carry the groceries, take the call walking. It is almost insulting how effective the boring stuff is. But that is why it works, because it is sustainable and invisible. And over time it changes not just the body, but the self-story. The whole series ends up saying one thing: comfort is useful, but not enough. You need enough friction to stay awake to your life. That feels like the right place to land, honestly. We came in talking about books, and ended up talking about how to live, which is a very annoying thing for books to do. But a good annoying thing. Thanks for staying with us through both parts of this conversation. We loved doing it, and we will see you in the next one. Welcome back. This one gets into why comfort can quietly make us weaker. We're also getting into how stories, not just habits, shape what we can tolerate. Bro, that Arctic story is insane because it rewires your entire nervous system. Dude, a hot airplane becomes a luxury spa after a month of freezing. That's the whole trick, though, right? Context changes everything. Exactly, and that's why discomfort is often just a story we haven't updated yet. But people act like discomfort is some sacred moral achievement. Not sacred, just useful when your body has gone a bit soft on you. The wild part is how modern life removes effort so completely that we forget effort matters. Then we invent gyms and act like we discovered movement in 2004. We outsourced walking and then made a membership plan to recover it. And the book's point is not anti-modernity, it's anti-amnesia. I liked that because it's not saying hot water is bad, it's saying hot water is easy to miss. Right, gratitude dies when everything becomes normal too fast. That prevalence idea is brutal because when problems disappear, we just manufacture new ones. Human beings are basically problem collectors with snacks. That is painfully accurate and probably the most offensive accurate thing you can say. The face study is so revealing because the threshold keeps moving. So even when life improves, our brains go looking for the next threat, which is great for survival, terrible for peace. And then you combine that with abundance, and suddenly people are richer but not happier. That might be the most depressing spreadsheet in human history. Richer, more entertained, more fed, and still somehow more annoyed. That's why the episode kept circling back to intentional discomfort. Like the stairs thing, which sounds tiny until you realize tiny is the whole game. Tiny choices compound because they train identity, not just fitness. Yes, the identity part is the real monster here. If you keep choosing the harder option, your self-story changes. If you keep choosing the escalator, your spirit becomes a potato. A deeply sedentary potato with excellent logistics. And then you see it in feet, backs, shoulders, all of it. The shoe example hit hard because it's such a normal thing. We literally weaken the parts of us that are supposed to support us. Comfort is amazing until it starts charging interest. That should be on a billboard outside every office building. And then there's the weird twist where scarcity can actually sharpen people. That part was fascinating because fewer resources made people more inventive. Not because scarcity is noble, but because constraints force first principles. Which is why startups do better when they are broke and terrified. Broke is a terrifying project manager. It makes you stop performing and start solving. Do you think big companies lose that because they get too comfortable? Totally. Because resources invite default behavior, and default behavior kills originality. Nothing says innovation like a giant committee and 3 catering options. That is exactly how creativity goes to die in a corner office. But the deeper idea is that uncertainty is not the enemy we think it is. That's the hardest part for most people, though, because certainty feels safer. Sure, but certainty also traps you inside a life you didn't consciously choose. And sometimes the only way out is to step into the unknown before you feel ready. That monk quote was crazy because it basically says hesitation itself is the mistake. Yeah, the abyss line is dramatic, but the point is real. You do not get transformation by waiting for perfect certainty. You get it by moving, failing, adapting, and then realizing you survived. That is the most human thing in the whole conversation. And that's why the hero's journey keeps showing up everywhere. The call comes, you resist it, then the hard middle changes you. Exactly. And we've engineered life so people rarely get that middle anymore. Which is why some people feel oddly stuck even when life is technically fine. The mental health piece really sits on top of all this, doesn't it? Yeah, because abundance without meaning just becomes noise. And noise with better branding. That is the whole modern condition in one sentence. The antidote is not suffering for its own sake, it's choosing friction on purpose. A hard conversation, a walk, a stare, a run, a team, a limit. Anything that reminds you you are alive and capable. And maybe that's the real luxury now, not ease, but earned ease. That's a good way to end it because it keeps the whole series honest. We started with books and ended up with a survival manual for modern life, which is a very suspicious thing for a podcast to do, but here we are. If this series did one thing, I hope it made comfort feel less automatic. And I hope it made discomfort feel a little more usable. Thanks for staying with us through both episodes. We loved this conversation, and we'll catch you in the next one. Welcome back, because this one gets into why comfort keeps fooling us. It is basically a conversation about discomfort, scarcity, and the stories in our heads. And somehow that turns into feet, planes, stairs, and the meaning of happiness. The Arctic story alone is ridiculous in the best way. Bro, going from freezing tundra to airplane pretzels is such a brutal glow-up. That is the whole point, though. Context changes everything. The same seat, the same snack, the same bathroom suddenly feels magical. Hot water on a plane becomes a spiritual experience after a month of suffering. Which is such a cursed sentence, but also true. And that's why the modern world is dangerous in a sneaky way. Because we adapt so fast that ease stops feeling like ease. We just rename comfort as normal and then start chasing the next problem. That prevalence thing is scary because the brain is basically bored of good news. It starts treating minor annoyances like emergencies. So your life gets better and your brain goes, cool, now what can we complain about? That is painfully human. And then the happiness data just makes it more annoying. More income, more stuff, more tools, but not necessarily more happiness. That gap is the whole existential prank of modern life. Which is why the old wisdom stuff starts sounding less quaint and more intelligent. The religions, the Stoics, the people saying do less, want less, control yourself. They were all trying to stop the same spiral. Basically, ancient people were like, please do not become a dopamine goblin. That is an absurdly modern insult for a very old problem. And then exercise becomes the cleanest example of it. In the past, movement was life, not a wellness subscription. Nobody was waking up like, let me train for the sake of training. They moved because the day demanded it. That's why the rucking idea feels so intuitive once you hear it. Carrying weight, walking, preserving muscle, getting cardio, all at once. It is almost insulting how elegant that is. Meanwhile, modern fitness is like, have you tried 12 machines and a mirror? And a playlist called Beast Mode. Exactly, with a shaker bottle that costs $30. But the deeper point is that our bodies still expect friction. Weak feet, weak backs, weak hips, all of it adds up. If you remove every stress from the system gets fragile. That barefoot shoe story is wild because it sounds niche until your foot explodes. That is the most persuasive marketing campaign ever. Pain. Same with sitting on the floor. It sounds almost too basic to matter, which is probably why it matters. We built chairs that save us from effort, then blamed our bodies for collapsing. That is the trap. We keep outsourcing tiny bits of strength. Then one day we try to do something normal, and the body says absolutely not. That's where the 2% idea gets dangerous in a good way. Because it turns identity into small, repeated choices, not big declarations. Take the stairs, carry the groceries, walk during the call, park far away. Basically be mildly annoying to your own convenience all day. That is such a funny self-help strategy. But it compounds in both directions, and that is the scary part. More movement makes more movement feel possible. Less movement makes even ordinary effort feel expensive. That is basically a slow-motion accountancy problem for the body. Bro, you just turned aging into bookkeeping. And psychologically, it is the same deal. Hard conversations, hard projects, hard commitments, they all train the same muscle. The muscle is trust in yourself. That's why the belief thing lands so hard. Beliefs are really just evidence we keep accepting as truth. So every uncomfortable commitment becomes new evidence. That boxer example is perfect because nobody is watching, but the self still is. The body remembers the story before the crowd ever does. Which is terrifying because your private excuses are building your public life. And that leads right into the certainty problem. People want the adventure, they just want the outcome to be guaranteed. But certainty is usually just a prettier word for stagnation. The app tells you where the driver is, and suddenly civilization feels advanced. We really are a species that pays for calm with money and data. Yet the good stuff still lives inside uncertainty. The opportunity, the creativity, the breakthrough, they show up after the fear. That scarcity story is great because it flips the script on resources. Less money can force better ideas because there is nowhere to hide. It is weirdly liberating when the budget disappears. Suddenly the genius shows up because panic took the wheel. But that is also why big organizations get sluggish. More brains does not automatically mean more creativity. Sometimes it means more permission to be average. Congratulations, we have 40 people and no imagination. That would be a brutal company review. The underdog mentality is really about staying alert. Not acting like the game is over just because things are working. That is probably where a lot of people get soft. They stop paying attention and start protecting comfort. Which brings us back to the corporations and the fun problem. The hard truth is that the addictive stuff works because it is fun. If you make the platform less compelling, people leave. The ethical casino goes bankrupt and becomes a museum. That is such a grim but accurate sentence. So the real answer is awareness, not moral panic. You have to know why you are reaching for the thing. Freedom starts when the choice becomes conscious. That is a much harder standard than just blaming the machine. And that is probably why the books hit people so hard. They do not just describe the problem, they hand you a mirror. A very annoying mirror, but a useful one. The best part is that the fixes are never glamorous. Walk more, sit differently, take the hard call, try the hard trip. That is the whole philosophy, really. Earned ease instead of automatic ease. And that feels like a pretty clean place to land the series. We came in talking about modern comfort and ended up at character. Classic podcast behavior somehow. But honestly, that is the point of all of it. The life you want is probably hiding inside the friction you avoid. And the more you practice that, the less fragile you get. Thanks for hanging with us through both episodes. If you made it this far, you are officially a 2% person in spirit. We'll see you in the next one.